Hi there, and welcome to another episode of The InEVitable. This is MotorTrend's podcast where we talk about the future of the car, the future of mobility, and we have a very intriguing guest today, one that Ed Lowe, who's my co-host on this podcast, has been wanting to get for a long time. His name is Doug Field, and Ed, why don't you tell us just a little bit about Doug?
Yes, I missed the bell, so here it is. Doug is the Chief Advanced Product Development and Technology Officer for Ford Motor Company.
But forget about Ford. What did he do before Ford?
Yes, so long time ago, he is actually apparently, according to Jim, the CEO of Ford, he's employee number one at Segway. So you remember all those kind of dorky personal mobility vehicles that now have morphed into the kids that all the kids were riding around at Christmas, like
and the mall cops like them and all that.
The mall cops, right? So Doug started at Segway. Actually, he started at Ford. Originally, he was a Ford engineer. He's a mechanical engineer by education. Worked at Segway. Did a lot of advanced technology work there, and has subsequently worked at Apple, Tesla, back at Apple again, where he may or may not have been involved with whatever Apple was doing with a future car before he was hired away to work at Ford. And
if I could summarize that for a second, Segway, then Apple, he was working on this. Then he went to Tesla and he was working on the Model 3. Which is, until the Model Y came out, the most successful EV in the world. Now the Model Y has supplanted it, which is largely a rebodied Model 3. And went back to Apple. They were maybe going to make a car. No one really knows. They won't talk. Now he's at Ford. And Farley, the CEO, split the company up. And one of them is totally concerned with electric vehicles. And Doug, for lack of a better job title, because his is too long, is in charge of that, the Ford EV initiative.
He's basically the guy building all of the electronic architecture in all of Ford's vehicles. We talk a lot about software-defined vehicles. Doug is basically in charge of building that infrastructure. And it's important to note, because I keep mentioning this, as much as we talk about EVs, SDVs, software-defined vehicles, are even bigger because EV is just the powertrain.
Right.
Software is going to run through, and there's still a lot of life left, internal combustion, in hybrids and plug-in hybrids, but software governs them all, no matter what is powering the vehicle.
That's a great point. Going forward, we're going to see software-defined vehicles that still have internal combustion motor. We have them already today. If like a hybrid that can do an over-the-air update is a software-defined vehicle.
Exactly. So this guy, super smart. I do want to make a note, just like I am dialing in here because of my, I'm still kind of COVID positive. We recorded this one at the racetrack. So we recorded it at
the worst
WeatherTech
situation
Raceway.
Possible.
Right. We recorded it at Laguna Seca in the classroom they use for the racing school. And even though we shut the doors, there were a bunch of vintage race cars ripping around the track. It was also hot, so we had fans running. You might hear that
it was
in the
90s. You could not do a worse situation for a podcast, but we think it's okay.
But we tried.
Yeah.
Anyways, despite all the technical challenges, we hope you enjoy the episode. A lot of insights in what Ford and others are doing in the EV and the software-defined vehicle space. So enjoy. Doug Field, Chief Advanced Product Development and Technology Officer for Ford Motor Company. Welcome, Doug Field.
Thank you.
Or as your boss is very fond of saying, Doug Fields.
Yes.
Which is
only sometimes. Only sometimes.
He called you Doug Fields a couple times on the podcast.
Okay.
Now,
the only reason I mind is that there's a Mark Fields.
There was a Mark
in the past.
Yes.
And so I want a clean slate.
You would
Not that there's anything wrong with Mark Fields. I just want a clean slate.
You would think.
Sure. No nepotism. Right. Oh, whoops.
So, is this? Have you ever done a podcast before?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Oh, that's bad on me. I should have done the research. Okay. How many? Many?
Just one.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well.
Yeah, I try and keep a low profile.
Okay. Well, thank you for doing this. I have been sort of in hot pursuit since I met you a little over, I think, a year ago.
Yeah. If I can butt in, Ed has been talking about this interview right now as if like we have Einstein on the podcast.
Well, we do.
Okay.
So,
Wow. No.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe
No
Oppenheimer
pressure
to be
here,
more
huh?
timely, but yeah, he's
No.
very excited.
No, you got it wrong.
No.
Yeah.
And
This
really,
is Edward Teller.
not as not if we listen to also what Jim Farley said on this will be the previous podcast that we did with him, also during Monterey Car Week. Jim spoke very highly of you. We talked a lot about what you're doing, and especially in the Model E part of the company and with software-defined vehicles.
Right.
And so let's just start there, because I've been trying to
Popularize
the term a little bit amongst the consumer-facing, sort of the general public. And so, to the layperson, could you just explain as concisely as you can, what is a software-defined vehicle? What defines it? I'll just start there.
A software-defined vehicle, the way I think about it is the car is the world's most beautiful robot. And so everything that moves on the car should be controlled by software. Everything that sees or processes or makes sounds, any of those things should all be driven by software. The wheels, the steering, all driven by software. So if you think about a car as a robot, you have software in your head that controls basically everything, and everything you touch and use to make a decision and then to say something or do something goes through your central processor and the software that is in your head, with only a few exceptions. Like if somebody hits your knee and your leg kicks out, that's not making a round trip up through your brain. And there are a few things like that. But even those, they have software right nearby the hardware, but less like the central compute and central software that I'm talking about when we say the car is a robot.
Okay. So that's a lot for somebody who might be listening and is like, well, what does it mean? What does it mean that, Ed and Johnny keep talking about these vehicles that are coming?
Well, how about this? How is it different than a hardware-defined vehicle?
So a pure hardware-designed vehicle would be one where everything is basically controlled through mechanical means. It's basically a mechanical watch. So the connection that shifts the transmission is through a knob and a lever that a person pulls. The actuation of the brakes is by a push of the pedal, and then fluid going out to the discs, right, closing the discs. So everything in that vehicle is controlled typically mechanically. In a purely mechanically defined vehicle, too, you have no electronic engine controls. So you have points and distributors and carburetors, which are all mechanical means of doing things like atomizing fuel, sending a spark to a cylinder.
But even like a manual diesel, which would have no spark plug, less electricity.
Right.
So.
Yep.
Okay. But thank you for that follow-up, Johnny, because so if I'm listening to you, and I don't know you from Adam, but I know I do keep hearing Ed and Johnny talking about the future and these software-defined vehicles and how much they're going to make my life better, and I'm sitting here going, well, here, I understand what you just said about mechanically defined vehicles. I understand roughly how brakes work or what happens when I move a lever. I don't understand software per se. I'm a layperson. I don't understand how it's going to make my life better. So can you explain?
What's the advantage to a software-defined vehicle?
I'm a little scared. There's things going on in the world with the phones and cyber and cloud and AI,
right.
So all that.
Well, there's been a progression that started a long time ago in how software has come into vehicles, but not really come to define them. And the first place that software has landed has been very impactful to somebody like your life, because a big part of it is safety. So the first capability of firing an airbag, detecting whether the car is rolling over, and actually having circuits that have a little bit of software. ABS brakes, that requires a sensor that detects something and some sort of processing unit driven by a small amount of software that then releases the brakes, which is not what you're asking it to do. So a lot of safety features are driven by software.
And then traction control, stability control,
and
radar, braking.
Correct, exactly. So a lot has come in the form of safety. The other place where software came in the earliest is in emissions.
Yep.
So the ability to control an internal combustion engine at the level you need to minimize the emissions, it requires that you advance the spark as far as you can. To do that, you have to detect a knock and then make a decision. So instead of the spinning points and the carburetor and the sort of random mixing of fuel and air, all of those things are controlled by a computer based on, again, sort of the robot principle. I sense things, I make a decision, and then I do things.
And that's whenever, if your oxygen sensor goes out, that's the part of the emissions detector.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And that's like losing a finger or losing your ear or something. It limits your ability to do a specific job.
Right.
Okay. So I'm going to keep going because I'm going to play the Luddite and say, well, I'm still not convinced. I keep hearing.
Well, I would just say, how about this? What's the advantage? So I'm a consumer. Like you told me, my car's had ABS since the early '90s. Whatever, traction controls, it's ubiquitous now. Why should I care about software-defined vehicles?
And I think this is where the transition occurs that so many companies will miss. And Tesla's really gone out in front on this in terms of defining a vehicle by its software. So there are simple things like I now connect to the cloud and I can lock and unlock my vehicle from my phone, even if I've lost my keys. Autonomy, the ability to operate on the highway with camera, radar usually, that requires software. That is a big value that I think people really want. We have Blue Cruise, customers love it. And I think the infotainment system is a lot of what people focus on in the inside, but it's really just one small piece of a software-defined vehicle. It is the interface that you use to decide what your vehicle is doing, give yourself the entertainment, but that's only the beginning. It's sort of like somebody putting an iPad in the car and copying it and wanting to make it do a similar set of things. What becomes really interesting is if you say, I'm going to build a system that a phone can't do. So any company that's basically putting displays in and saying, I'm going to do the same thing that your phone does, it's going to be really hard to keep up with phones. Right. So what you have to do is say, I have data that the phone doesn't have. I have information that the phone doesn't have. I have my microphones in exactly the right place relative to a person's mouth. I can see whether someone's eyes are open or closed, or looking down the road or not looking down the road. These all require an engineered space around you. And the car is really the only place where you have so much control over both the sensors and the feedback to a customer. And that's the beginning of a whole nother set of experiences.
Okay.
So you said something interesting.
You just went over a bunch of stuff.
Okay, but I'm still talking in the abstract, right? You're going to start asking for examples.
No,
right?
no. I go ahead. Ed.
I was going to say because you brought up both Tesla, which we'll get to in a second, but the phone analogy. That I was going to say, like, if I was a Luddite, I said, you're still not convincing me. I keep hearing that these cars are going to be essentially smartphones on wheels. You used to work at a handset manufacturer. Do you like that analogy? You think it's apt? No?
I would be extremely disappointed if that's what it came down to. Oh. And I think the ability of an automaker, a really funny experience I had when we were at Apple and we were talking about the auto industry, and they said, that's a really low volume market.
Right. Yes. So that's like 14 million, 15 million cars a year in the U.S. Right. That's low volume.
That's a small market
for Apple.
So Apple has 1 billion customers running iOS that they can service and keep up with. Now, if an automaker wants to do the same things
Hang on,
a phone
I'm buy
does,
some Apple stock right now.
Too late.
The way you say
yeah. But if you want to compete with a company that's got that kind of scale and do only the things that a phone does, you're going to lose. You're going to lose. And that's why navigation inside of vehicles has generally been way worse than CarPlay or Android Auto. Right. The ability to get your own music, connect, and there's just so many examples of where, like voice, you think an auto manufacturer is going to be able to generate Siri or Google Voice anywhere near the pace that those companies can. So that's not the battleground. And a smartphone on wheels would be, a huge disappointment.
So you said that a lot of other companies are going to miss something crucial about software-defined vehicles. You said they're going to miss it. What are they going to miss, and why are they going to miss it?
Well, I think software in most auto companies is a means to an end. It's generally a service to an organization that builds hardware. So there's someone in the organization that's responsible for a brake controller. And so the software person works for them and calibrates the brakes and puts the software in there. So software today has been extremely distributed because it's tended to come from suppliers, and it's tended to evolve in each of these functions that we talked about before, like an airbag function or an ABS function. And the auto companies, they, for the most part, walked away from this.
Right.
Visteon, Delphi, and they focused on the core vertical integration and specialty in the company being engines and transmissions. So in the shift to EVs, that's not where the expertise and the differentiation between vehicles is really going to occur. So when you hear about some auto manufacturers, what they think about doing is putting a big computer in the center of the vehicle and then having it connect to all these modules. That's not a software-defined vehicle. That is a vehicle with a big computer. Okay. The software-defined vehicle really occurs when you approach the entire architecture of the vehicle and say, I have basically an operating system, a platform that I'm going to use to control all the systems in the vehicle. And what happens is, so if you imagine Apple, when they release a new version of iOS or a new phone, they don't go out and ask all the app developers what they would like to have and what features they plan, and then come back and design the phone around that. What they do is create a platform where if you write an app, you can get access to the microphone. You can play something through a speaker. And that's where I want to get our cars. And at that point, we call them unimaginably great vehicles, because the whole idea is that the best idea is not shipped with the car. Right. You haven't thought of it.
I want to bookmark that, but I think just do a little interpretation because of the dependency on suppliers. So if someone besides Ford making parts that go into a Ford, they're not native.
Right.
And by a software-defined vehicle, is everything is going to speak the language of the car. The car doesn't have to learn the language of the stuff that's on the car.
Much better said and much more simple.
I'm just trying to, I'm just thinking,
So I can come up with even stupid ideas and tell you how, if you've built really a software-defined vehicle, it's ready for them. So I'll throw one out, and then you have to think of one. So you have a rear-facing camera, which you have for any number of reasons. And there's a car following you too closely with the brights on. So the camera detects a light level that can't be associated with lights unless they were bright. So now, because everything and every actuator in the vehicle is software controlled, I detect that, and I take the side mirrors and I fold them just a little bit, and then I move the mirrors to aim the lights back at the driver's eyes. Okay, so I think we probably can't ship that.
Okay.
But the point is, and you should try and come up with one. You can pretty much think of anything that I can do by grabbing a sensor or some information off the car, and anything I can do with the car is just your canvas. Okay. It's amazing.
So I would just say what you could do is just have the windshield spritzers go off, and they'll just soak the guy behind you.
Yeah, you could do that.
You could turn. That's the trick you see in high school, right?
You might have.
In high school we had them sideways. Yeah.
Yeah, you might have to aim the nozzles, which
right.
No, you
Yeah.
Well, this is interesting because we had a couple conversations before, and you mentioned this, I think, in one of them, which was that cars will become a platform for creativity. Like you want to engineer it so, but you explained it in a way just now, which is very elegant, which is this Apple sort of a analogy or comparison. Like you want to build a vehicle similar to the way they've done it with the phones, where the app developers can utilize.
You're gonna have to speak up so we can hear what you're saying.
Oh, sorry. You're gonna engineer the vehicles in a way so that the app developers can harness this platform that you've built, where you've put the sensors in the right place. You have the ability for communicate between the vehicle, the sensors, the cloud, like basically building a system, almost an ecosystem,
right,
that doesn't exist currently. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Would you ever, just going with that, so in other words, let's say I own a Rivian and he owns a Tesla and you own a Ford. Could I be an app developer who could make a product where there's a marketplace that the three of us could ever download it and the same bobble would work on all three cars? You ever envision that happening? Or is that too far out?
The part of that I expect will happen is that the infotainment functions, they're not safety critical. They don't tend to drive any actuators. Those will probably settle into an OS in the same way the phone did. So the same reason I said the car has to do a lot more than the phone, those functions will probably become native in vehicles through a common OS. But to be able to take the information that's your sensors control your actuators is something that a manufacturer really is going to have to do. I mean, the best, most complex example of the robot right now is autonomous driving, right? The ability to take all this information from these sensors, make sense of the world, and then use it to control the brakes, the acceleration, and the steering. And that's a tremendously valuable piece of software and piece of technology because it lowers stress levels, it increases safety, and eventually it'll give people back time. And those are hugely impactful things that you can do for somebody that's using a vehicle for transportation. You give people time back, everything changes.
So we talked a little bit about over-the-air updates, and I have an EV. I love when I get an update when there's a lot of really cool, useful new features. That's cool. But I mean, the one that always sticks with me is we had a Tesla in 2013 for a year, the Model S, and I remember Kim Reynolds, a former colleague of ours, he was in charge of it, and he came in one morning just beeping, smile touching his eyes. He goes, at my street, there's a pothole or a bump or some speed bump. And so, every time I have to raise the suspension, and it did it automatically today after an update. It just happened. I didn't have to do anything. And it was like Christmas morning for a 60-something-year-old guy. And I'm bringing this up because, obviously I think part of software-defined vehicles is these kind of updates. But what I worry about, and we've spoken to not just to your CEO, but like when a lot of this kind of stuff becomes like subscription, does that joy go away? Do you worry about that?
Well,
do you worry? Can you do both?
Let's start with some basic building blocks here, because it's a great question. But is OTA, over the updates, is that the definer of a software-defined vehicle? Would you say that is the first characteristic?
No, I think that's a definer of a connected vehicle. Okay. But together, generally today you don't do one of those alone. Any sufficiently sophisticated device in your life is connected and driven by software.
Okay, but what's interesting is very recently Jim Farley said that he was quoted as saying that it's a big problem for legacy car manufacturers. OTA is a big problem for legacy car manufacturers because of the way cars have traditionally been built. And I think you mentioned it, the reliance on the suppliers.
Correct.
And
which is not, actually, it's less important that that's how cars are built and more important that that's how the company is run.
Right.
Okay. But that's also, it seems to be a feature the older guys, the old guard, right? The legacy guys, because this is how they've always been. The upstarts, the Chinese EV manufacturers, for instance, they seem to be able to. The ones that are is it vertical integration that makes OTA like more possible? Just that you're doing everything in house versus having to work.
Well, I think it's interesting. The way a typical legacy automotive company is going to view the product is based on how it's built. So if you go to the factory and watch a car being built, that is a really good way to divide the car up and give people responsibilities and specialize them and say, you have this, you have this, you have this, and you have this. You will never write great software that way. There is a thing called a platform that in the past has been a mechanical thing, maybe a chassis and a motor and a transmission and things like that.
Yeah.
Right. But it's still kind of an assembly of pieces. It's just an assembly of pieces that you don't want to change very often.
Right. This cable goes through this hole in the firewall and standardize that. And that's
right.
It. Yeah.
So if you think about how even organizationally you have to set up software, which is to say, I might put software in your module and then I might pull it back out and put it somewhere else. That when you sit down and you look at the architecture of the software, it is completely decoupled from the diagram that shows how all of these modules plug together. Or I should say, it should be completely decoupled. It is not, and even we're on that journey. It is a very difficult journey because you have to change the car, you have to change the relationship with suppliers, and most importantly, you have to completely change the organization.
Which is why Jim also split the company into two major parts, essentially three parts though, with Ford Model E for EVs and software-defined vehicles, Ford Blue, which is internal combustion, and all the big brands, F-150 and Mustang, and then Ford Pro for the work product, right? Is that something that you helped influence in when you joined, coming over from your time in Apple and Tesla in terms of?
Well, I certainly was consulted and had influence over, but I think Jim was way in front of the industry and me and any other number of people in recognizing that if a massive company has to change, the fastest way to do that is sometimes to get a smaller portion of it to change, demonstrate the model, and then spread it, rather than trying to change the whole company. So that was part of it. And the other part was that the things you have to be good at to build EVs, in this case, are very, very different than the things you have to be good at.
Can you give us an example?
Well, efficiency is a good one. So batteries are expensive. They're big. They account for a huge portion of the cost of a vehicle. In an EV, a good team is going to be tracking every single piece of loss of efficiency down to how many dollars is a one count of coefficient of drag. How many dollars is a kilogram? How many dollars is a Newton meter of drag torque from a brake that you paid a little bit less for and doesn't completely lift off the rotor? And optimizes all of those systems based on, hey, I've only got so much energy on the vehicle to get range, and it's expensive to put more on there, and you convert everything in your design process to basically serving that battery and using it in the most efficient way for the customer.
Yeah, I've talked with Peter Rawlinson from Lucid about that, and he's yelling at me like, "Stop writing about horsepower, write about efficiency." And I go, "It's not sexy. Can't sell magazines."
Did you work with Peter? Did you have any time?
No, he was actually he had left Tesla by the time I arrived.
Okay, so and let's talk a little bit about that, because because I was asking about OTA as being, is it the definer? We should come back to that. As what is the defining characteristic of a software defined vehicle? But Tesla is the first software-defined vehicle. Is that fair to say?
I think that's fair. Yeah.
In the Model S, in particular.
In the original Model S, yeah.
Yes. Okay.
But yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then So if it's not, if OTA is a defining characteristic of a connected car, what then would you say is like every software-defined vehicle is going to have this? Is it the sensor integration that you talked about? Is it is there something else?
Native language?
Is there one characteristic, something that's understandable to a lay audience?
Yeah.
Like,
well, I think people will tell you, people have different definitions of it right now.
okay.
I do think a good part of the industry does think about it as an iPhone on wheels. So that the central defining characteristic is this central computer that tends to be connected to things like the infotainment system plus autonomy. That's sort of the other big chunk of it. And kind of that's, once you have those two, you have a software-defined vehicle. Thinking of it as a robot.
Autonomy is really key to a software-defined vehicle. Is part of the definition.
I wouldn't say it's part of the definition.
Okay.
It's just one of the first places where this type of functionality that I talked to you about is going to land first because it's so valuable to the customer.
Got it. Yeah,
and
because
just more and more of the car is going to become like what is done with autonomy. That's what I mean.
Right. And there are a lot of things that can be affected by, if you write software for autonomy, you can move the steering wheel and you can, sensors and radar and all that.
Yep.
Because like, for instance, the reason I asked that was I own a Rivian, and the autonomy is really bad. I like everything else about the truck, but like if you put on the hands-free, if you can go 30 seconds in a straight line, that's pretty impressive for that truck. And so everyone's like, how's the hands-free? It's terrible, worst in the industry. I like everything else about it. So, I feel that the Rivian's pretty software defined, even though it's a lot of hardware.
Yeah.
So a lot of cool
Yep.
updates.
And I'm sure they'll make it better over time.
And again, Lucid Peter Rawlinson, I remember he said, we are a fast follower in autonomy. All the hardware is there. The second there's good software, we'll upload it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I want to talk a little bit about autonomy because I feel like you go a couple of years, 2 years ago, everybody was really bullish on how fast this was all coming.
Or like 7 years ago. It was really it was a long time ago.
Well,
Yeah,
okay,
it's quite a
sure.
while ago.
So,
Yeah.
but even, I'm referencing the Argo AI's sort of the shutdown of that, and I feel like, and notably, most recently, we've seen a lot of high profile incidences with autonomous vehicles in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Yes, one drove into wet cement.
Well, there's a whole thing with outside land.
Yeah, talk about a long tail issue for autonomy to solve. Wet cement.
Right.
Yeah.
In your mind, is this like, nope, this is kind of what we thought is going to happen? It'll go through some hiccups here and there, or is the timeline longer? Is it not coming as quickly as people keep talking about? Where are we on the roadmap towards full autonomy in vehicles?
Well, I think that the challenge is the problem that these companies are working on, which is a vehicle without a steering wheel operating in an urban environment that's unstructured around pedestrians.
Yep.
Is the hardest form of the problem. It is unbelievably hard. And, there's a couple approaches where you go really heavy into sensors, or whether you go light on sensors and heavy on AI. But I think Elon said at one point, solving autonomy is kind of solving generalized intelligence.
Yeah.
If you really want to make a car that you could own and do everything you do with a car today and never drive it, that is decades away, I believe.
Okay.
So you mean like true level 5 autonomy, no steering wheel?
Yes.
I just say, hey, Ford, take me to the grocery store.
Or San Francisco,
Correct.
and I'm going to put the seat back and go to sleep.
Yeah. And
But I think that, the reason we made some of the decisions we did with Argo is there's an asymptote. There's a lot of progress that's been made. And then each successive part of the problem starts to become harder and harder and harder. And I think what we really wanted to do is to harness the part that we could solve in a reasonable amount of time and actually start getting the value to customers now. If you have a vehicle that can completely drive itself on highways, would you want to not work on that because you're trying to solve the urban problem? We said no, that we could start with an easier form of the problem and deliver tremendous value to the customer.
And I think a lot of people think the opposite. They think like driving around their neighborhood is a really easy thing to do. Freeways are scary. The cars are going fast. But for a computer, everything's going in one direction at uniform speed, and you never stop. You shouldn't stop. Yeah. And, if anything else, you have very well marked, soft turns, not a hard, there's never a 90 degree.
Right.
So it's much easier, from that perspective, right, for the software.
Right. It's a structured environment with a set of rules.
Yeah.
Like pedestrians are not allowed on it.
Or bicycles.
Or bicycles,
dogs,
right.
Yeah.
And construction is a challenge to deal with, but it is nothing like an unstructured environment in an urban setting where a car can just stop. Pedestrians can do whatever they want.
Soccer balls come flying.
Yeah, or a football game lets out and everybody heads in every direction. It's interesting when you see that an entire fleet of autonomous vehicles are shut down because of connectivity.
Yeah.
That tells you something very important.
Right.
Yes.
It would not have shut down if those vehicles were operating by themselves.
Interesting.
So I guess you could say, well, yes. So there was an important connection just for the fundamental operation of that vehicle that was actually being operated by an outside source, probably a human, to either keep it from getting unstuck, watch what's going on, make decisions. And that's because this last 5%, or people call it the long tail, is not solved. And the way to solve it is to have a virtual human in the car that can get in and get out virtually through a connected service.
Oof.
Okay, now for those of you who are like
virtual humans,
for those of you who are listening, you're like, what are you talking about this? So there was an incident recently in the Bay Area. There's a big concert called Outside Lands, and a whole bunch of vehicles from a certain autonomous car company. They all basically stopped because of everybody uploading selfies to Instagram at that concert. Essentially crushed the network. If you've ever been in a public place and you can't send a text through,
like
same
Laguna Seca Raceway during
today,
car week,
basically the cars were like your mobile phone in that situation. Now, that to me though, looking back, hindsight in 2020, and certainly here I am, commenter on YouTube, seems rather obvious. Like, is this not a situation? Is this somebody didn't think of and somebody didn't model, or even it wasn't in anybody's like you know what I'm saying? Like,
well, a true level 4 vehicle would not have been stopped by that
because the human
was
could drive
capable. It was because level 4 is defined as within a defined operational domain. You can operate without the use of a human. That's what a level 4 car is. So if it's in its operating domain and it stops because it can't connect, then that means there's a set of problems that haven't been solved that are depending on that connection to support the vehicle.
But also, I mean, a billion times more than me, but also level 4 cars would still have a steering wheel, right? Like technically there could be a driver who could drive away.
They can, right, or they can't. But it also recognizes, to some extent, these companies. I mean, what these vehicles do already is unbelievable.
Right.
But it also recognizes the point I made earlier, which is if you haven't solved the last 5%, do you really want to hold back the 95?
Right.
So that connectivity is a representation of that. We haven't solved every single problem, but we've solved enough to try and have some value.
So then is my knee-jerk reaction then wrong? Because I would say, like, when it just seems like you had in this situation, you had one dependency on connectivity when you should have had some other redundant connection, or is that just not possible? There would be no like a satellite linkage, or there's no other way through that other than that pipeline of cell service through the car, right?
Well,
or vehicle to vehicle, or is there an infrastructure thing? It could have pinged off of a...
Sure, but those can break as well. So I think connectivity is a really bad technology right now to do anything that would that could affect the safety of the vehicle or could strand it. It's just not that reliable of a technology.
Right.
And it's hard to imagine that it could be because of the huge number of environmental conditions that you don't control.
Okay.
So the robot, the L4 vehicle, needs to be able to handle itself in those scenarios to truly be level 4.
Okay.
Right, and I think what you're saying also is that right now, like Waymo, for instance, there are human operators that do something, whether it's monitoring or like holding an OK button down or something, and if connectivity fails, it's the human on the other end that like suddenly the car's stranded.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
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 I mean, the way this technology is going to evolve is basically if you restrict what's called the ODD, which is the operational domain in which the vehicle is allowed to operate, if you shrink it small enough, autonomy is already solved.
Okay.
There are vehicles at airports that have tires that drive on a cement track, and there's nobody in them, nobody running them. That's level 4.
Right.
It's just a tiny operational domain where the problem has become very easy. So the way autonomy will spread is that people will pick an operational domain, they'll get it working, and then they'll start to expand. But urban operation is the hardest form of the problem. Now, the good news is if you really solve that, you could kind of go anywhere, assuming you've designed around high speeds. But it is the hardest technical problem of our time, without a doubt.
Wow, really?
I believe it's harder than putting someone on the moon.
Well,
Solving
we've done
autonomy.
that.
Well, yes. Okay. Good.
Oh,
good
so
point.
let's go.
Good
So
point.
okay. So yeah, your
We're putting a
resume.
person on Mars.
Yeah. But so real quick. So Tesla, Apple, Ford. I want to get back to the over the updates and also subscriptions, because I think a lot of people are starting to, and we spoke with Jim about subscriptions. Tesla.
Can I jump? I jump back to one thing?
Yes.
So you talked about the company separating between Model E, Blue, Pro, and Lincoln, and there's an important part of that. So the propulsion system defines the products that are in Model E,
Right.
which is electric propulsion. The software revolution, I think, is bigger than the propulsion revolution.
Yes.
And the team at Ford that is building software will deploy it in all of those vehicles.
Yes.
In fact, we think Ford Pro will be one of the places where initially our most advanced software-defined vehicle functionality will go,
Yes.
because it provides monetary value. If you're mercenary, like a person running a business and wanting it as efficient as possible, you can deliver software that lets people make more money.
Yep.
And so getting in there with prognostics that keep vehicles from braking without any warning, things like that, but they are all going to make their way back into the retail market.
Predictive maintenance. Yeah. Jim mentioned, Jim drove that point home very strongly about how much opportunity there is in Ford Pro. But the larger point is really important for our audience to hear, which is why I keep talking about it. I'm trying to tell my staff about it. They're just like, what are you talking about, Ed? I'm like, it's SDV is bigger than EV. Okay. EV is like literally the powertrain.
Right.
Software is going to flow through every part of all the vehicles that are to come, including hybrids, plug-in hybrids, even the sunset era of the internal combustion engine. Software is going to dictate. It already does, as you mentioned. It's already in the black box.
Yeah,
It's
and
already
look, internal combustion, certain applications like high-end sports cars might never go away. You might just you might have a very small number of internal combustion cars being built forever. But the software,
people still have horses and they still ride them.
Yes, exactly.
It was transportation once.
Exactly right. Yeah,
and now it's entertainment. I think that's a very extreme way. That will absolutely be true. But I also think there are jobs to be done that are going to take an extraordinary leaps in technology if you really want to do those jobs with electric propulsion.
Like what? Give us a job.
Like towing a very heavy trailer, very long distances. That is a really hard problem until infrastructure for charging is so present and so fast.
Right.
Because not only is charging slower than refueling, But in an application like that, the batteries are really, really big.
Huge and heavy.
And so you need a lot of power to get the energy back into them. So it's going to take a lot of time for some of these applications. There's people who maintain a pipeline in Alaska. And would you like to take an electric vehicle out there and have a charger back at your base? Probably not. If you run out of energy, you die.
Right.
So having a diesel engine and a really big tank is going to serve that application very well for a very long time.
Right.
So we're running out of time, and we got a lot more to cover. So let's switch gears and go into subscription. Okay.
Yeah.
Because
I was just going to say, so, Tesla, was first I know about the over-the-air updates, and it was magic and all this cool, you bought, first time I remember you bought a car and then it got better as it went on. And then, Apple
that blew people's minds.
Yeah. And then Apple, the amount of money I pay out every month for the junk I subscribe to that I've used once is like, I'm broke because of it. And now, so Ford, you guys are, software defined. So you're going to have over the air updates, but also sounds like some sort of subscriptions. What's the mix? What tell us about that?
And we are aware that there's a new colleague, which we want to talk about in a second. But actually, I want your overview on. Again, we part of the podcast. Part of what we're trying to do here is to help with the FUD, with the fear and uncertainty and doubt about the coming wave of electric vehicles. Right. And there was a story about a certain German brand,
from Bavaria. They're going to charge you to turn on the seat heaters that you purchase.
Right, and that's just global outrage.
Well, American outrage. Other countries reacted very differently.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like Korea said, like, because apparently they subscribe to like the water filter on their fridge, and they're used to that.
Okay. All right. But anyways.
Yeah.
What do consumers need to know about this? The software, subscription services to their car. What's the first thing that they need to understand?
Well, I can talk about what they should understand about Ford.
Okay. Yes.
I really can't speak for the entire industry.
No, just Ford. We will talk to the other ones.
Please speak on behalf of all humankind.
Yes.
Okay.
Software can be used for good and it can be used for evil.
Okay, right? Great. Start there.
So I think it starts with saying there are a certain set of functions in software that are like we would consider a fundamental right of our customers. Obviously, regulatory is in there, but there will be more to that for us. Safety is an obvious
staying
example
warm
of that. Yeah, exactly. And I think in particular, taking a piece of hardware that the customer knows doesn't really depend on software. Like that's part of the reason seat heating is so egregious. Like people know you don't really need software to heat your seats. And you also just last year didn't charge me for it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's like you're taking something away. So I do think that's such an egregious example. That is kind of the exception that proves the rule. But so there's that. The fundamental rights, which includes safety and security, a certain level of security. And then there's a certain level of things that we would consider enjoyable, delightful, that should be in every vehicle. Our vehicles, you mentioned it, is about joy. Mm-hmm. It's important. Then as you go up from there, there are services, particularly ones if you're first or you're better, that you can charge for. So the thing with software is each individual enablement of a vehicle, software does not have any incremental cost when you put it on a vehicle. It doesn't cost anything, but it costs a tremendous amount to develop it.
Right.
So if you want a business model that fuels continued software development, you have to have some form of differentiated software that people can't get in a bunch of other places that provides value. We say we want to earn the right to monetize software.
Okay.
We don't want to just run around and monetize software. We want to earn the right. And I think the other thing that people should know is the challenge with software is going to be when something really great happens, and people start to copy it, and software goes very fast, so people can copy fast. It moves down back into that category of that should be in my vehicle, and there's no way I should be paying for it.
You told me this is a graph.
Yes.
This is the. Losing it.
A Kano chart.
Yes, a Kano chart.
So there's a set of things that you now take for granted. So reliability at one point was something that you would choose one car over another car.
Yes.
Now
Famously,
today,
yeah.
yes. Now today, unless you buy a really crappy car, you sort of expect that as a given.
Table stakes.
Yes, and the same thing is going to happen with software, even as it did with safety software, right? Stability control was an option at one point. You paid
before
for
it was mandated, right? Yeah,
and then
backup cameras. It was mandated. Yeah.
Exactly. And what happened is people, in those cases, even the government was involved to say this is such great software that it's saving lives, which means you all must use it. So all software will kind of be commoditized over time, I think, unless it carries a cost of actually delivering it or maintaining it. So the best businesses are the ones where you create value with the thing you sell, which in our case is a vehicle, and software, and then a service. That's where you really generate value that kind of sticks. So a level of software that tells you your car is going to break, I think we're going to do a great job of that, but could other people do that? Over time, they could. But if you combine that with, we have a service and a system that detects something, forwards the part, gets it in the hands of a service technician who shows up at your house, and you never know that anything went wrong. Nothing. Think the ultimate luxury of not having to do things like take your vehicle to service, that is an incredible luxury. And again, it's time.
This is
and people will pay for that. People will pay for an opportunity to have more time.
Yeah, this is the predictive maintenance where Jim mentioned that the
Right.
sensor in the motor could tell you that the windshield wiper is.
But what I worry about is if a lot of the business model is based on, again, subscriptions, like my truck, for instance, I bought it 6 months later, there was this update and suddenly there was this camping mode, which had it been offered for me, we don't camp. I never even thought about buying it. However, what it really does is because air suspension, if you're parked at an angle, it levels the vehicle.
Yeah.
Use it all the time. Just if the kids are going to play in the back of it, level it out, and that way their toys aren't sliding out the bed. Yeah. And does all this other stuff. But when people ask me about a truck, that's one of the things I say is and this camping mode, you won't believe how great it is. And it's also good because if you're a drive-in movie, it'll turn everything off, but you can choose what you want to turn on. Anyways, my point is there's been a lot of good sentiment generated by this software update that had they said we're charged for this, maybe not. So I'm just wondering, how do you figure out that line?
Well, you wouldn't have paid for it if you only saw it as camping mode. So
but it just said camping mode.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So this is also a really interesting part of technology in general is you don't necessarily know exactly how people are going to use something.
Right.
And the ability to iterate in the field is really important, and learning from how the customer uses it and what they actually do. And
the great example of that is this phone that we're all having on our desks. The flash on it is now a flashlight.
Yeah.
For everything. It's putting the flashlight business out.
I've never used the flash. It's probably been, this is an iPhone 14. I've probably used flash photography twice in 14 phones. I use the flashlight every day.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and so this is also a great example because the flashlight app was something that a developer could charge for at one point.
Right.
Yes, I remember that. Yes.
And now it's built into every phone, and you'd be really pissed off if someone took it out now.
100%.
So that's a great example of how these software features are going to, and your fitness as a company to be able to stay ahead of that, it's going to be really tough. You have to have a great team and a great set of systems where you're constantly figuring out what the customer is doing, developing what should be next and then deploying it over the air. And that loop and how fast you can get through the loop is going to be the fitness of any company that truly wants to be in the business of software-defined vehicles.
I'm glad you said fitness, because as you were describing, I was like, man, I mean, I know it sounds like a solid business
Sounds
model,
exhausting,
but
doesn't
it sounds exhausting. That's exactly what I was thinking. And thankfully, I think most of this exhaustion won't be on your shoulders, but on this new guy, Peter Stern, who was just recently named president of Ford Integrated Services, right? So
unfortunately,
no?
it won't.
How are you guys going to work together?
A lot will fall on his shoulders. But the ability to develop this software and deploy it, like I can't walk away from that. Like I can't walk away from writing code and my organization delivering that and working on the cloud tools. What Peter's going to do that's going to change everything is to define the software in a way that makes it a business, and to do that across all of Ford rather than vehicle by vehicle by vehicle. So he will aim me. So we will work together on what we want to do and what business we want to build, and he will aim a lot of my resources. We'll work together to define the product that's going to go after that, and we can be much more focused, and we can build businesses that add enough value that people actually want to pay for them because they do such great things.
So he's the software-defined vehicle software definer.
He is the. We will define a lot of things together, but he is the,
you're the builder.
General manager and business. He runs the business of software.
Okay,
got it.
He runs and which is really interesting because Jim, understanding that software is a business, not just software is a technology. Software is a business, and so Blue Cruise was a technology, and then vehicles grabbed it. Lincoln called it Active Glide. Others called it Blue Cruise, and people deployed it. And then we saw how much people like this, and we said, no, the more important part of Blue Cruise is it's a horizontal. It cuts across all of our products. And some vehicles were charging this for it, some were charging this, some had subscriptions, some didn't. So it's saying like, okay, no, Blue Cruise is a business actually. It's a business that is as important as a nameplate, like a Bronco or a Lightning.
Right.
And we have traditionally in the industry had business people, general managers that ran vehicles or ran groups of vehicles. Like I'm in charge of trucks as a business, making the right investments, making sure that they're profitable, taking care of the customers, managing demand and supply, all of those things that it takes to run a successful business. And what's so important about this transition is Ford is saying software is a business. Software is not just engineering and technology. Software is a business. So now we have a partnership between engineering and design, digital design and creative design, and a business, which is also a creative process as well.
Did you help bring Peter over from Apple? Was he a former colleague?
Well, I'd like to think I did, but really, Jim's pretty compelling. Ford's pretty compelling right now. And I think Peter, like some of the other folks we brought in, just sees this really cool opportunity. The software and services business in a lot of devices is starting to get a little bit mature, and it's really in its infancy. In the auto industry, I think, and so I think that was really attractive to him. So I can't really take. I can't really take credit for it.
I think you're being very modest because Jim was being very clever in hiring you, and and we've talked a little bit about how, for all the car manufacturers to understand and build software-defined vehicles and go vertical, recruiting is a huge deal, right?
Yes.
Because you have to get after the brightest minds in the tech industry.
Absolutely.
You're not just going after traditional car engineers or executives. You got to go. You have to go into the phones. You have to go into all the digital products. How much of your time is spent on the talent side of it?
Yeah.
Are you going out there like really trying to convince people, or and not that you need a ton of convincing, but I mean these are conversations. They're getting headhunted to go to NVIDIA or AWS or something,
or any other car maker.
Yeah.
Yep. So this is really, really important. And your question before about why traditional automakers may not make this is actually a really big part of this. You said some very nice things about me at the beginning and comparing me to scientists who change the world. I have great teams. I've worked with great teams. And when you have some success in those teams, people, like, they get a taste of it and they want more.
Yeah.
And the best way to get more is to join the people that you worked with before that created that environment and did that work in that way. So there's this flywheel that starts that is so important. And if you hire A's, they want to work with A's. If you hire B's, they don't really know. They're going to hire C's. The C's hire D's. The D's hire F's.
Right. So you got to avoid the Peter principle.
Yes. And these people who are at this level of talent, they don't fit into traditional large corporations. They don't fit. So there's a new level of tolerance, acceptance around how these people work, how they dress. And the bunny slippers that I have in my office. Right. There's this reverence for talent. If someone is truly great at these kinds of technologies, like, they get to be pretty darn eccentric. So accepting those kind of people is a big deal. And the cultural differences between some of the mature technologies that are really buttoned down mature aspects of the auto industry are just really, really different.
Yeah.
From what's required to get and take these people. The great thing is recruiting has been unbelievably effective. I didn't expect that. A lot of people actually went and said, what the hell are you doing going forward? Part of it was, you're not going to get great people. Completely incorrect. And I think there's a lot of people who were in tech early on, were able to be part of the very beginning of things, the very early stages of an iPhone or an Android or a Facebook, and things have plateaued out a little bit.
Yeah,
and
the
people,
iPhone 14 is functionally identical to to the 5. Right.
It's a lot better, but yeah.
Yes, there's a camera, there's a mic. There's
correct. The architecture is fairly stable.
Yeah.
And part of that was Steve. He always said, like, the ultimate piece of hardware is just a window into software.
Right.
Like, the great hardware is just going to get out of the way and getting into software. So I think a lot of these folks see the opportunity in coming into Ford as something new and as the birth of something special and important.
Yeah.
And then you combine that with kind of a really cool old brand. Everyone's got Ford stories from their parents or grandparents or whatever. It's actually been, it's a really attractive place for tech people to work.
Okay.
If you do the right things in how you set things up.
We're getting on close to the end here. So you're hiring all these talented people, right? An hour. Okay. All right. Well, fast forward 12 years, 15 years, right? So you have all these talented people. What does my car do in 15 years that it doesn't do today?
So here's the right way to answer that question.
Or what does my Ford do?
Yes.
Here's the right way to answer that question. Autonomy may have a special answer that you won't have to drive it very much. In 15 years, could it be you don't have to drive it ever? I don't know. I probably don't. I don't think so. And aside from that, I don't know. And it's really important that I say that.
That's
because
the best answer. Yeah.
If I knew, it should be 3 years from now.
Right.
Because we should be spending that software that quickly, getting it out there. And even if it required new hardware, I should be able to say, no, that's 3 years from now. So the whole thing about we want to build these unimaginably great products is the stuff that's out there. We don't know what it is yet. And as a company, our ability to sort of accept that and then say, the way I'm going to find out is how quickly I can get through the next 3 to 5 years, discover what people love, discover how people are changing the way they use their automobiles, respond to it, and stay ahead of that.
Right.
So anyone who says, I really know exactly what a car is going to be like 15 years from now, is wrong.
Terrific answer.
Already wrong.
I love it. Yeah.
Well, one of the things we did talk about in a previous conversation, though, and I'm curious whether we think we're still on pace for that, is one of the things that will go away, we think, in the next 3 or 5 years, are car keys, as we know,
absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
We bye-bye to your car key, bye-bye to the smart key or whatever, proximity key.
The thing in your wallet.
It should all be on this phone, this device everybody carries, right? Or is there another technical solution that's going to get you into your car and get you on your way?
No.
It's going to be the phone. Phone is key.
Absolutely.
How do you solve for the car wash?
Well, you should have an ability to unlock a car and put it in a state that a car wash would work for, or a valet. A valet mode is another one where you have to have that. But
don't leave this, a half square mile area.
Geofence.
You can drive
at a certain speed, or
right.
But for it to really be ubiquitous, we needed help from the phone industry to really get to the point where it can be a great experience. We can know whether it's in the car or outside the car.
Right.
And the advent of ultra wideband, which is now going to be standard in phones. And one of the reasons it is it's great for security and proximity. So it works for next generation home locks on doors, but it's really, really effective in cars. So we've started this journey already. It works really, really well in a number of our vehicles. But it's going to get so much better. And then the only thing you have to make sure you protect for additionally is a dead battery, right? And the best way to do that is actually that thing that people have in their wallet, that card.
I have one.
Actually also is in the phone. It's near field communication that doesn't.
It's like an RDF
power.
thing in
NFC,
the case or something.
It's powered by the device that's asking it who it is, rather than the other way around.
Okay. All right. Let's go through some lightning round questions, because I want to make sure we get to know you.
Does that mean
you
I have
personally?
to give you a short answer?
Yes. But I do want to just ask you one quick technical thing. How involved are you with Ford's adoption of the North American charging standard? How much did you get into maybe Jim's ear about that? It was funny. I told him when we interviewed him, we met here at Pebble last year, and he was openly complaining about how bad the SA, the CCS charge handles are. They break all the time. And he had said very glowing things about Tesla's charger, and it was very clearly on his mind.
Yeah.
And then, lo and behold, first in November that year, Tesla announces they're changing the name and calling it this sort of grandiose name, and everyone's like, "Oh, it's a new charging standard." Yeah, it's a new charging standard, huh? And then Ford announces, and then holy smokes, everybody and their mama
within 2 weeks.
Gm's on,
changed.
and then Nissan, and then Volvo, first European, and then Mercedes-Benz. Like, how much did you get into his head on that, if at all?
Well, you can probably guess that, having spent the time at Tesla and building a car around this standard, that I knew that the connector itself was superior. I would love to build cars around that, but much more importantly, Tesla has such a massive head start on charging, and they were so focused on the adoption of EVs that they knew this was essential to people actually adopting them. And I think Tesla truly has a mission of accelerating the adoption of sustainable transportation. So this was mission consistent. But we spent a lot of time on it, on how we can make sure that our vehicles wouldn't be disadvantaged on that. And we spent a lot of time internally saying, do we have to carry 2 connectors?
This is at Ford or at Tesla?
No, at Ford.
At Ford, yeah.
Okay,
yeah. And so, I was involved a lot. I wanted it to happen, and I knew that our customers would benefit in multiple ways.
Very modest. And again, I'm laughing because I was smiling broadly about 10 minutes ago when you were talking about the organization and how the very talented people who are brought in get, if their eccentricities are accepted. Jim mentioned a certain, maybe perhaps conversation and about how things were going within Ford, and how the new people you brought in were disruptive, but in a positive way. And I think he was talking about maybe this guy and changing some of the culture. But let's spend our remaining moments talking about you personally. I know you have a pretty interesting collection, and you live around here, right? You're pretty close.
Well, at this point, depending on what week you call me,
Okay.
I either live in Michigan
Okay.
or in California. So
Okay.
Where in California?
Los Gatos.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So this is my home track
Yeah, nice.
that I can come to. But I would say I spend about 40% on the West Coast and
Okay.
60% in Michigan right now. So yeah, I have a few other things in the garage, and they probably seem like really weird combinations. So I have a 1965 Mini Cooper 1275S.
Wonderful car.
What a brilliant vehicle. I have a 1926 Packard.
Wow.
Single six Roadster. And I have a Morgan three-wheeler.
Oh, now we're talking.
is-
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Now I get you now. Yes, that's
and,
a car.
More recently, I have a 63 and a half Galaxy Fastback 427.
Also
Now,
cool.
that one lives out in Michigan. I live pretty close to Woodward Avenue. So
Okay.
Yeah, perfect for Woodward. Yeah, but that's
And I have
the three-wheeler is one of the.
Yeah.
Just nothing makes you smile more than that
no.
car.
I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of like my Ford GT is a fighter jet, right?
Right.
And this is like a Sopwith Camel.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you
yeah,
pretty
yeah,
much
yeah.
you pretty much have every experience on both ends of the spectrum.
Nice.
You still have the Tesla. Are you?
I have one Tesla, which is Model 3 serial number 3,
Okay.
Oh, cool.
which was also
Oh.
what a privilege. So
But that's like we were talking about. We hosted a panel yesterday about like what's going to be collectible in 25 years. Model 3 serial number 3 is probably a big money.
Don't modify
auction item.
I think it probably belongs in a museum somewhere.
Okay.
Any
So-
secret hacks you've put into it? Do you get any kind of special unlock features?
My Tesla?
Yeah.
No, not at this point. I mean, Tesla's really careful about never deploying software to a customer that isn't ready. So when I was an employee, I had special status.
Right.
I would get special software. I'm a customer now, so those days are over.
And you're sure they're not turning on the cameras while they're in their while they're in your garage, or you
I
got
don't
tape
know.
over things in the car? Or?
Right.
I am not there anymore, and I have no idea.
Okay. All right.
Real quick. No, go ahead.
No.
Okay, I was going to say, I and Mr. Musk say Tesla, and I've been getting chided that it's Tesla, but I always thought it was Tesla. Do you have an opinion on the pronunciation?
No, I do not.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm sure one of them is right based on
You're in the middle.
his
I've been
home-
listening to you, and you're like
Yeah.
Tesla.
down the middle. Like down the middle between ICE and EV is
Right.
but okay,
Just checking.
needs to be checked with people who speak his home language.
Right.
It's home language.
Yeah.
I have so many things I'd like to ask you, but I know we're getting close here. Just culturally, what was the biggest, I would say, shift for you in coming back to Ford? So I think it's important for people to understand that you started at Ford. Was it your first real job out of school?
First real job. Yeah.
And what were you doing? And your degree, are you a mechanical engineer?
Yes. Yeah.
How the hell did you end up doing all the software stuff?
Well, I wrote software in college.
Okay.
Actually would solve a lot of mechanical problems with software. I won some competition on the best material, and the material and its strength was based on an algorithm that the professor wrote, and I wrote code that would basically just pound it with options and then figure out what was the best. I had a Mac, so I was into mechanical engineering, but what I wanted to work on robots. Basically, I wouldn't have articulated it that way. Software, electronics, mechanical. So part of the reason I left the auto industry is that was it seemed completely unattainable.
Right.
That you could combine those things. And the places I went after that, Segway is an ultimate example of that. Right. I was able to do all of them. Back to your question about Ford, coming back to Ford, I think the things that I didn't quite expect. So one is that the organization pretty much knows it has to change. And I credit Jim for that, and also probably I credit Tesla for that, right? But so I didn't come in trying to push change on people who say, why do you want to change it? The way we did it before was fine. Instead, I have to work with people who want to change but haven't seen what this looks like. They've not seen what this new world looks like. Okay. And it's a very different kind of problem, and in some ways it's a little harder to solve in some ways. You can just fire everybody if they're just saying we don't need to change, right?
Right.
But you would gut the company and lose 120 years of history. So you don't want to do that, but you need to spend time with people and show them the new world, let them adapt as much as possible. And it's different than I expected.
I just want to say, I'm really heartened. Like, I love hearing that you're coming not only from Tesla, but from Apple back, because once in a while, we're on some kind of junket and there's, car journalists. I use the term loosely, and Silicon Valley journalists, and, get some drinks at dinner and they're like, oh, cars are so lame now. It's all about, Silicon Valley. It's all about apps and da-da-da-da. And it's cool to hear that, actually the cool stuff's going to be coming out of Detroit. Not, by way maybe of Silicon Valley, but it's not the phone that's like where the best and the brightest need to go to. They can also go back to the car. That was like a car person.
Yeah.
I love hearing that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and even the factories are going to change from software, but there's still going to be these crucibles of, steel and aluminum and all of the pieces of the vehicle that require people to build. And so
no, but it's like
those factories will still be there. They'll run different, and software will be running around and connecting to vehicles, but those factories will be there.
But I'm blanking on his name. The French philosopher who said, back in the day, the best minds were building, cathedrals, and now they're building Citroen DSs. Mm-hmm. Best minds in France, and so it's like, I felt there was a time when the car industry was wow, and then it sort of went down for a while, mm-hmm. And now it really does seem to be rocketing back, which is fun. And you hear about how every OEM is hiring thousands upon thousands of software engineers.
Yes,
and that's, I don't know. To me, it's great. I think it's like the future of the car is really bright.
The more you hear that they're hiring, probably the less likely they are to win in the software game.
It's not a quantity. It's not a quantity game.
It's a quality game.
Yes.
Yeah, and one of the things that Steve Jobs said that I've never forgotten, partly because I'm hit by it constantly, is your great software engineer is not 20% better than your good software engineer. They're 10 times better. And because software is so fast, the really, really great people make massive impact very, very quickly. And again, they bring in more 10Xers. And then the organization, so you have a team of 400 people that would compete with a team of 4,000 mediocre software engineers. Which one do you think will be able to organize and execute faster? I'd take the 400, and the 400 will decimate the 4,000. If it's truly formed with those kinds of people, it'll decimate it.
Gotcha.
So companies that are building software teams, they better know what software talent is.
That's a great point.
I've
never heard that. So
I could spend half an hour just unpacking all of that, because if you're an industry watcher, there was something that went down with a large German car manufacturer that resulted in a massive leadership change. And the guy this is VW Group, sorry, I'll just say.
Yeah.
Herbert Diess said at one point he was going to spend 90 billion euros, and he's going to hire 10,000 software engineers. And he didn't quite do that, and the product didn't improve the way it maybe should have, and he was exited after about 4 years. And I talked to Doug about, I think right after this had happened, and it was very clear basically the same thing. Like this is not like, that's an old school way of thinking. That's like, hey, let's open up a second shift. Let's open up 2 more shifts at the factory to get more of this out. It's
Our
not
software factory.
right.
Yeah.
It's not. It doesn't.
Right.
Software doesn't ship like that. You don't need. It's not a. You don't need more muscle. You need more brains.
More brain. Yeah.
So,
right.
Yeah, money in this new world, money is actually not the scarce commodity.
Oh yeah.
The scarce commodity is the talent.
Right.
I'm going to digest that for a while
And
before I form an opinion.
that is a very big difference too. We've had conversations inside of Ford as Ford is figuring this out, and you see that there's a major project that you can't move forward on because you're missing 40 people. And there might be a conversation in the room. Well, this is crazy. Just go hire them. We have the money. Here you go. Here you're funded.
Right.
It's like, no, you don't understand. Those 40 people could
Don't
take me
work here.
6 months to get.
Right.
Once we have them, they'll be great. But
And
we're being told to wind up.
Yeah. But and just
wow.
on the last point of that, and it's the reason for splitting up the company, and for why a lot of the auto industry has to set up these separate units to compete for this talent, because just the hiring of these folks blows up traditional legacy car manufacturers. But we got to wrap it up. We keep going, but we'll come back and find time to do this.
Final thought.
Yeah. And again, it's a reaction to how you opened all of this with names like Oppenheimer and Einstein and crazy stuff like that.
Oh, we're just going off what Jim was saying.
Yeah, right. This is going to happen through a whole bunch of people, not me. And in a lot of ways, I'm privileged to have this position at the top of company reporting to Jim, but it's so that I can do things that there's a bunch of people who know what needs to be done, but they haven't had this authority in the past.
I mean, but Oppenheimer, he organized a team. He didn't solve the implosion problem, right? He hired the guy who did. So.
Can you tell what movie Johnny just watched?
No, I read a book.
This is going to happen, and it's not going to be me. It's going to be a great team that I enabled through Jim bringing me into the leadership of Ford.
All right.
Well, we can get into this. So, when we did interview, Jim yesterday, he was talking about the GTD and how big Ford is going on racing with the Mustang.
Right.
And he just rambled off, from drag racing to IMSA to
Lamar,
everything. Yeah. And so
Doug, what's your perspective on racing and being out here at Laguna Seca?
There you go.
Well, I love racing, and I come to Laguna Seca and drive here. And EVs, another thing, we talked about how EVs aren't good at a whole bunch of things yet. One of them is racing. EVs are not good at that. But I think it's more than that. I have an Apple Watch, but a lot of the time I'll wear a mechanical watch. It's an inferior technology, right? But there is an emotional draw to the craftsmanship and refinement that it takes to make something like that work. If you imagine what an internal combustion engine is compared to an electric motor, you're like, how the hell did they ever make this thing work?
Oh, yeah.
And we talked about horses, right? Horses were once transportation, and they are no longer transportation, but people still race horses.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's great to watch and be a part of. So I think the challenge that pushes the technology as well as the human is a really great part of racing that I really respect. And things are discovered. The best aerodynamicists that I've worked with have come from Formula One.
Right.
Of course.
Even if they're working on vents on the inside of the car, the best ones come from Formula One.
They can see air. Yeah.
So the discipline of racing just drives so much refinement that it creates talent as well.
Yep. Racing improves the breed.
I know we have Formula E. That's kind of it for EV racing. A little bit of underground stuff. But when do we start to see mainstream, SCCA EV racing or GT3 EV? When how far off is that? Is it ever going to happen? Is internal combustion really the solution for what we're looking at the Rolex Historics here at Laguna Seca?
This is a big track, and it is tough to get through more than a few laps without overheating electrical systems. So one of the things about electrical is they have unbelievable peak power. So you know what the Plaid does, like, you know,
Right.
quarter mile in under 10 seconds. But if you put it out here, it'll do a couple of laps unbelievable, and you'll see it, but all the ICE cars catch up with it before the race is over.
Sure. Good for Pikes
I
Peak.
I do think there will be EV racing, but it'll be a different kind of racing than sort of an endurance race around a track that's long distance. There'll be short bursts. Drag racing is great, hill climbs, and maybe really short courses where the torque that an electric motor gives you coming out of a corner and the electronics and the control are really what determine winning. But it's going to be a different kind of race.
Is the overheating electronics, the voltage spiking, is that
Mostly battery.
The battery getting hot? That's an unsolvable problem? Like you can't just, like I put a transmission cooler on the car, I rear end coolers or a battery, like.
It's eventually solvable, but if you want to put a lot of energy in a car, there is an inverse relationship between the power you can get out of the battery and the energy you get out of the battery. So, yes, could we make batteries that could be pretty good for racing? Yes, they would not be useful for an average customer. And it's hard to compete. These will always be heavier than internal combustion engines.
Even if like solid state batteries come online?
Yes.
Those are, okay, so they'll still be a lot heavier?
Yeah. The specific energy of gasoline is so high.
Just the density, energy density.
It's so high.
Okay.
All right.
Well, cool.
Well, once again, thank you, Doug. This was amazing. We appreciate your time and all your insights, and we look forward to having you on again in the future.
Another episode
Thank you.
of
I
The
enjoyed it.
InEVitable. There you go. Ed loves to ring his bell.
Thank you.